Welcome back to Zarila Hoa Stories. Let's begin Chapter 1, The HOA Warning. The letter was waiting on my doorstep, folded neatly in the same white envelope the HOA always used. I didn't even need to open it to know who it was from. Karen. Karen wasn't just my neighbor, she was the self-appointed queen of our cul-de-sac, the woman who treated the homeowners association like her personal throne. If a flower bed was out of place, she wrote a letter. If a trash can stayed on the curb for more than an hour, she wrote a letter. And now, it seemed, my Jeep had earned me another one. I sighed, tearing the envelope open. The bold print read, "Final warning. Remove unauthorized vehicle immediately or face fines." My eyes narrowed. Unauthorized vehicle? The Jeep was mine, parked in my own driveway, and perfectly legal. Sure, it wasn't shiny like Karen's spotless SUV. It was rugged, built for more than grocery runs and carpool duty. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that this Jeep wasn't just a car. It was part of an ongoing police task force operation. I glanced at the vehicle through my window. To Karen, it was an eyesore. To me, it was untouchable. But knowing her, she wouldn't stop at letters. Karen had a habit of pushing things too far. And I had a bad feeling that this time, her obsession with neighborhood order was about to collide with something far bigger than she could ever imagine. The Jeep wasn't just my property. It was a line she couldn't afford to cross. Chapter 2, The Jeep in Question. From the outside, my Jeep looked like any other beat-up, mud-splattered vehicle that annoyed Karen's sense of perfection. Its olive paint was faded in places, the bumper carried a few scrapes, and the lock on the steering wheel gave it a rough, no-nonsense look. To anyone else, it was just another junk car. But the Jeep wasn't what it seemed. Hidden beneath its ordinary exterior was a carefully designed arsenal of surveillance equipment. Behind the dashboard sat encrypted radios that connected directly to a police task force. The trunk held a compartment only I could unlock, one that stored specialized gear for operations I couldn't talk about. Even the license plate was part of a rotation system, allowing the Jeep to blend in wherever it was needed. Karen, of course, knew none of this. All she saw was a vehicle that didn't fit the community aesthetic. She had complained about it for months, calling it military trash and a hazard to property values. She even tried to rally other neighbors to sign a petition against it. Every time I watched her snapping photos from across the street, clipboard in hand, I couldn't help but smirk. She thought she was building a case against me. What she didn't realize was that the Jeep wasn't just mine, it was government property on loan. And tampering with it, in any way, would mean serious consequences. Still, Karen wasn't the type to back down. If anything, the more I ignored her, the more determined she became. And as I watched her glare from her yard that afternoon, jotting something furiously on her clipboard, I knew one thing: it was only a matter of time before she made her move. Chapter 3, Karen's Obsession. Karen had always been nosy, but when it came to my Jeep, her behavior shifted from irritating to downright obsessive. She treated it like a personal vendetta. At first, it was small things, snapping pictures every time she walked her dog, scribbling notes on her clipboard, whispering to other neighbors at the mailbox. But soon, her obsession grew louder. One Saturday morning, she marched right up to my door, sunglasses perched on her nose and a stack of papers in hand. "This is your last chance," she declared, waving the documents like they were court orders. "That thing," she jabbed a finger toward the Jeep, "is a violation of HOA standards. It has to go." I didn't flinch. I simply told her, calmly, that the Jeep was staying put. The look in her eyes said it all. Karen wasn't used to people standing up to her. And when people did, she didn't back down, she escalated. That evening, I caught her circling my driveway, phone in hand, snapping pictures from every angle. Another time, she crouched by the Jeep, scribbling down my license plate like she was gathering evidence for a trial. What Karen didn't realize was that her constant meddling was starting to draw the wrong kind of attention. The Jeep wasn't just any vehicle, it was linked to ongoing investigations, people who wouldn't take kindly to being exposed. Her actions weren't just annoying anymore. They were dangerous. And I knew if Karen didn't stop soon, she was going to walk straight into trouble she could never handle. Chapter 4, The Break-In. It was just past midnight when I heard the faint metallic clink outside. At first, I thought it was the wind tossing around a trash can lid, but then it came again, sharper, deliberate. I peeked through the blinds, my pulse quickening. There she was. Karen. Her blonde bob was perfectly in place, even at that hour, and in her hands were a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters. She crouched by the Jeep, jaw tight with determination, her flashlight balanced awkwardly on the ground. I could hardly believe it. All her angry letters, all her nagging, and now she'd crossed the line. She slid the cutters around the lock on the steering wheel and pressed down. Snap. The sound echoed down the street. She paused, glanced around nervously, then smirked like she'd just won a battle. For Karen, this was a victory. For me, it was a disaster waiting to unfold. Because in cutting that lock, she hadn't just trespassed onto my property, she had tampered with federal equipment. What she didn't realize was that the Jeep wasn't just locked for safety. Its systems were rigged with alarms tied directly to the task force. Every movement she made inside was being monitored in real time. And Karen had just triggered something she would never see coming. Chapter 5, The Wrong Move. Karen yanked the broken lock off the steering wheel and tossed it onto the pavement with a satisfied huff. She pulled open the Jeep's door, muttering about community standards and property values. But the moment she slid into the driver's seat, her smirk faded. The dashboard flickered to life. Hidden screens glowed, encrypted code scrolled across monitors she had no business seeing. A faint red light blinked rapidly, faster with each passing second. Karen frowned and jabbed a button, convinced she'd found some kind of illegal modification. That was her mistake. The Jeep wasn't designed for people like Karen. It was wired for surveillance and field operations, and her careless meddling had just tripped the emergency failsafe. Suddenly, a piercing alarm erupted, shattering the quiet night. Red and blue strobes flashed from the Jeep's grille, flooding the cul-de-sac with light. Karen panicked, scrambling out of the seat, bolt cutters clattering to the ground. Her hands flailed as she shouted for the tow truck driver she had secretly called. But the man had already slammed his truck into reverse, tires squealing as he tore out of the neighborhood. Even he knew this was something bigger than a simple HOA dispute. Karen, wide-eyed and trembling, turned back to the Jeep as if it had come alive. She had wanted it gone. Now, she couldn't run from it. Because tampering with this vehicle hadn't just triggered lights and sirens. It had summoned the people who owned it. Chapter 6, The Task Force Arrives. Within minutes, the quiet suburban cul-de-sac was no longer quiet. A pair of unmarked black SUVs rolled in, engines low and steady. Their headlights cut through the chaos, casting Karen in the harsh glow as she stood frozen by the Jeep. The vehicle stopped abruptly, and men in tactical gear spilled out, moving with sharp precision. Their uniforms bore no obvious insignia, but the authority they carried was undeniable. One of them barked an order into a radio, while another swept the Jeep with a handheld scanner, confirming what they already knew: it had been breached. Karen's bravado cracked instantly. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, clutching her clipboard like it could shield her. "This vehicle violates HOA regulations, and—" "Ma'am, step away from the Jeep," one officer interrupted, his tone flat, commanding. Karen hesitated, then pointed accusingly at me as I stepped out onto my porch. "He's the one. He brought this thing here. It's against the rules." The officer's gaze shifted to me, and I nodded calmly. They already knew who I was, and why the Jeep was here. Karen, however, was another story. She had gone from neighborhood busybody to suspect in a federal matter in the span of 5 minutes. The lead officer leaned toward her, voice low and stern. "Do you have any idea what you just tampered with?" Her silence said it all. And as the flashing lights reflected off her wide, terrified eyes, I knew Karen had just entered a world she wasn't prepared for. Chapter 7, The Truth Revealed. Karen stood trembling as the officers encircled the jeep. One of them opened the rear compartment, revealing a neatly organized stash of surveillance gear, encrypted laptops, tactical headsets, and a duffel bag marked with a discreet police insignia. Another officer pulled up a live feed on one of the screens, showing grainy footage of a warehouse filled with armed men. Karen's mouth fell open. What is this?" she whispered, her clipboard now dangling uselessly at her side. "This vehicle is part of an active task force operation," the lead officer explained, his voice sharp with controlled anger. "Every piece of equipment you touched is classified. By cutting that lock, you didn't just violate HOA rules. You interfered with federal law enforcement." Karen's face drained of color. She shook her head frantically. "I didn't know. I thought it was just ugly. It didn't belong in our neighborhood." Her excuses sounded hollow in the weight of the moment. The officers weren't interested in her HOA rules or her obsession with order. To them, she had become a liability. I stood silently on my porch, arms crossed. Part of me wanted to step in, to explain that Karen wasn't malicious, just reckless. But another part of me knew the truth: Karen had brought this on herself. The officer's words cut through the night like a blade. "You're lucky we showed up before you caused something irreversible. If this equipment had gone offline for even 10 minutes, it could have compromised an entire operation." Karen swallowed hard, her knees wobbling. For the first time, the self-proclaimed queen of the cul-de-sac was powerless. And now, she finally understood that my Jeep wasn't just a car. It was a lifeline. Chapter 8: Consequences. The neighborhood was wide awake by the time the scene unfolded. Curtains twitched, front doors cracked open, and whispers filled the cul-de-sac. Karen, once the loudest voice on the block, now stood silent and pale, cornered by the very authority she thought she could control. The lead officer read her rights in a calm but unyielding tone. Her eyes darted frantically to the neighbors peeking from their porches. "This is a mistake," she cried. "I was just enforcing HOA rules." But no one came to her defense. For years, Karen had ruled the neighborhood with complaints and fines, wielding the HOA handbook like a weapon. Now, she was the one being held accountable, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. The officers placed her in handcuffs, guiding her toward one of the unmarked SUVs. She sputtered excuses, desperate to regain control. "I didn't know. I was trying to protect property values. This isn't fair." I stayed on my porch, arms crossed, meeting the stunned gazes of my neighbors. For the first time, their eyes weren't filled with annoyance at me, but with respect. They had seen the truth: Karen's war on my Jeep wasn't about order. It was about control. As the SUVs rolled away, Karen's cries faded into the night, leaving only the faint hum of the task force's presence. The lead officer approached me briefly, his words quiet but firm. "We'll handle the fallout. Keep the Jeep where it is." I nodded. The Jeep remained, its purpose clear, its mission ongoing. And Karen? She had finally learned the hard way that some battles aren't hers to fight. The queen of the cul-de-sac had fallen, and this time, there would be no HOA letter to save her.